In order to bring good luck, he married his only daughter to an old man. The old man had a white beard and blackened teeth, which angered Siggy and made her leave in frustration. She couldn't understand why, with their abundant wealth, Earl would marry his daughter to an old man. Earl explained to his wife that he had consulted a seer who predicted an impending revolt within the Viking. The leader of the rebellion was believed to be Ragnar, and the seer prophesied that Ragnar would crush Earl's bones and skull. That night, Earl was restless and fearful, as he had no idea where Ragnar was hiding. To ward off the ill omen, Earl decided to bring joy by marrying off his daughter. Although the groom was considerably older, he was at least an earl. Siggy reluctantly agreed verbally, but deep down, she plotted ways to save her daughter. The wedding took place as scheduled, and Earl held a grand feast for Thyri. Rollo's sudden appearance gave Thyri a glimmer of hope. She looked at him with a mixture of longing and hope, wishing that he had come to claim her hand in marriage so she wouldn't have to marry the old man. But Rollo didn't even glance at her. From the moment he entered, his eyes were fixed on Siggy. Earl noticed Rollo in the crowd and approached him to inquire about his purpose for being there. Rollo revealed that their fleet had been confiscated and they were being monitored by Earl's men. Vikings were born to raid and fight, and being monitored was detrimental to both sides. Earl offered to let them continue their voyages if Rollo revealed Ragnar's whereabouts.
Ragnar is dead.
You swear that on your arm ring?
No.
Then why?
I cannot swear because I have not seen a body. But I have heard nothing, and he is my brother. I'm sure in my heart he is dead.
Earl didn't fully trust his words, but to avoid disrupting his daughter's wedding, he pretended to believe him. However, he failed to notice the subtle flirtation between his wife and Rollo.
To go to the matrimonial chamber.
Shortly after, Earl announced the end of the wedding. Looking at the son-in-law who was older than himself, Siggy deeply resented Earl in her heart. After the wedding, Siggy secretly met with Rollo. After a brief intimacy, Siggy warned Rollo that Earl was cunning and would not spare him. Rollo didn't pay much attention, but as soon as he stepped out, he was captured by Earl's men. Earl subjected him to severe torture, but Rollo refused to disclose Ragnar's whereabouts. In the end, Earl used a small knife to leave scars on his face. Upon hearing the news of Rollo's capture, Ragnar knew that if things continued like this, Rollo would die sooner or later. Although he hadn't fully recovered from his own injuries, Ragnar couldn't leave his brother behind. After much contemplation, Ragnar finally came up with a bold plan.
I have another favor to ask of you. I want you to ask for a meeting with the Earl, and when you meet him, challenge him to a personal combat with me.
Following Ragnar's instructions, Floki conveyed his message to Earl. However, Earl wasn't a fool. He had many soldiers and could easily find and kill Ragnar. There was no need to risk a one-on-one confrontation. In the midst of their conversation, Earl suddenly remembered the words of the priest that killing Ragnar would solve everything. Ragnar had been evading him all this time, and there seemed to be no other way. Earl decided to take advantage of Ragnar's injuries and kill him directly, and so, Earl accepted Ragnar's challenge. On the eve of their final battle, Earl spoke honestly to his wife. In Ragnar, he saw a reflection of his younger self and he knew that Ragnar's views on the Western world were correct. But he couldn't support Ragnar's idea because it would mean that his own supporters would join Ragnar's side.
The seer promised you would kill him.
In a fleeting moment, Siggy even wished that the person to die would be her own husband. On the day of the decisive battle, Ragnar limped his way to the harbor. Rollo was released, and Earl marked his face with shameful scars. Thyri and her 90-year-old husband also arrived at the scene. The battle officially began, and Earl's henchmen announced the rules. The weapons for the duel were primarily axes and swords, with each person allowed to use 2 shields. Once the second shield was damaged, they could no longer use shields. Earl immediately discarded 1 shield, and Ragnar, not wanting to take advantage, also threw his shield and launched the first attack. Earl had the upper hand from the start. Seeing Ragnar discard his shield and sword, Earl did the same. The duel entered its final stage with the axe as the ultimate weapon. Ragnar, dragging his injured leg, struggled to fend off Earl's attacks. In a moment of carelessness, Ragnar was struck by Earl. Though not deep, the blow reopened Ragnar's unhealed sword wound, forcing him to cover it and continue the fight. The elderly Earl gradually lost strength, and Ragnar struck his back with a final blow. Earl could no longer stand, and upon seeing their leader's death, Earl's followers panicked and called for Ragnar to be killed. But there was no reaction from the crowd. Rollo walked slowly towards Earl and, taking up an axe, killed him with a single strike. Taking advantage of the chaos, Siggy approached her daughter and took the knife, stabbing her son-in-law to death. Siggy surveyed the surroundings and knew that Ragnar was the people's choice. She supports Ragnar as the new Earl.
Hail, Earl Ragnar!
Amidst the cheers of the masses, Ragnar finally ascended to the position of Earl, officially beginning a new chapter in the conquest of the Western world. Ragnar killed the tribal leader and ascended to the position of Earl. Despite Earl's greed and cunning, Ragnar decided to give him a proper burial, recognizing Earl as a brave Viking warrior. Ragnar planned to take Athelstan to experience Viking customs. He brought Athelstan to a tent. They saw two servants wiping a woman's body. Confused, Athelstan asked what was happening.
She's one of the Earl's slaves. When he died, all of his slave women were asked who wants to die with him. This one agreed.
She wants to die?
Meanwhile, the town was bustling with celebration as people rejoiced in the grand funeral. Athelstan ran into Bjorn, and the two of them enjoyed tasting meat together. They saw the female slave, supported by the two women, knocking on the doors of the men's houses in the town.
What are they doing?
She is having sex with the men who live in there.
Hearing this, Athelstan froze in place. By the coastline, a crowd had gathered, carrying Earl's body to the harbor. A priest was already waiting there, and Earl was placed on a small boat filled with firewood. The female slave was brought before the priest, visibly limping. The priest removed the newly worn jewelry from her and made her drink a cup of holy water. Even at that moment, the female slave still held onto the hope of continuing to serve her master in another world. Amidst the cheers of the crowd, the priest took out a dagger and slit the slave's throat. She was then placed on the boat to be buried alongside Earl. Athelstan couldn't bear to watch any longer. Siggy found Ragnar and expressed her desire to personally light the funeral pyre for Earl. Ragnar scoffed, as he would never entrust such an important task to a widow. Amidst the singing and dancing of the people, they set fire to the boat, sending them to Valhalla. After the funeral, Lagertha told her husband that she was pregnant again. Overwhelmed with joy at the blessings of the gods, Ragnar wept. At this time, Siggy was preparing to flee with her daughter. She had a vague sense that her time was running out. After all, previous new earls had treated the family of the previous earl in this way. Just then, Rollo burst in. He told Siggy that he understood Ragnar's character and that he would never kill innocent family members out of revenge. He assured her that he would protect them for the rest of their lives. From Rollo's gaze, it was clear that he was not willing to submit to his brother's authority. The long winter was coming to an end, and Lagertha's belly was growing day by day. Ragnar was planning to set sail again and plunder the Western world. Previously, due to the constraints of the former earl, he couldn't fully pursue his ambitions. Now that he was an earl himself, he intended to expand his influence. 3 Viking warships sailed towards the kingdom of Northumbria with Ragnar leading the way. This time, they didn't choose to land on shallow shores but directly sailed into the River Tyne in England, heading inland towards the kingdom. Upon hearing this news, the general who had escaped last time immediately reported it to King Aelle. Aelle was puzzled. Weren't these barbarians afraid of death? How dare they openly sail their ships into his kingdom?
I fear death as much as the next man. But I have no fear that afterwards, God will raise me up again.
Well said.
Seeing the cowardly behavior of the general, the king took him to a pit filled with venomous snakes.
Now, let us prepare to defend ourselves against these heathens and barbarians.
Ragnar led his fleet of 3 Viking ships into the heartland of the kingdom of Northumbria, intending to plunder the capital city. King Aelle urgently summoned the forces of England to defend against the invaders and recalled his brother to serve as the general.
Brother! Adelwulf!
Meanwhile, Ragnar and his Vikings began establishing a fortress along the riverbank. As this was a large-scale attack, they needed a stronghold and the opportunity to launch surprise attacks. Soon, Aethelwulf arrived with a large army at the Viking fortress. They encamped not far away, fortifying their defenses and waiting for the Vikings to attack. Aethelwulf's subordinates were puzzled by his actions.
How dare you argue with me? Go do your job, set up camp.